Good evening. It's Saturday evening, which means tomorrow is Sunday morning, which means tomorrow morning I have to preach. And one of the questions that I frequently get related to my weekly schedule is how I put together a sermon. Someone was asking me questions earlier this week about my sermon prep. And one of the things I do on Saturday nights is I actually review my sermon. But I'm going to walk you through really quickly the basics of how I like to prepare a sermon. So, my favorite way to actually put a sermon together is to, first of all, be preaching through a book of the Bible. So, right now I'm preaching through the book of Ephesians. And so, usually what I do when I'm preaching through a book of the Bible is I preach through it a chapter at a time, and I kind of break the chapter up into a couple segments. So I might actually be preaching through it half a chapter at a time. And that's typically what I've been doing through the book of Ephesians. So I usually carve up one chapter of the book into 2 weeks of messages, or sometimes 3. Right now I'm in chapter 4, and I'm carving that chapter up into 3 weeks of messages. But when I'm preparing the message, I like to, first of all, understand the big theme of the book. And so when you look at a book like the book of Ephesians, that book is based on the concept of God's eternal purposes for his church. And so each week we're talking about some of the things that Scripture talks about. I've been giving the background of the book and then kind of walking through the book a segment at a time. But each week when I'm preparing a message, I try to kind of look at the natural divisions of how each chapter is split up. And the section that I'm looking at that week, I try and look at the natural divisions, the paragraph breaks, things like that. And I try and break that down into maybe anywhere from 3 to 5 points. Usually it's 3 or 4 points that I'll select. And I'll work my way through that. And each section, I'm trying to hit on something related to the head, something related to the heart, and something related to the hands. And so when we look at Scripture, I want to understand, all right, the history, the background, things that it's all about. And I also want it to impact me emotionally. And I also want to know what I'm supposed to do with this. And as I do that, I'm also trying to demonstrate for our congregation how all Scripture is pointing us to Christ. And so that's kind of how I break down a section. I usually start off a message with something that I think is geared toward the heart. I usually try and end the message with something that's geared toward action or geared toward the hands. But I also thought it might be interesting to point out a couple other things to you. First of all, right now I'm charging up my iPad because I have discovered that I really enjoy preaching from the iPad, because no matter what situation I'm in, I can control the size of the font. And I can also control the backlighting if I have my notes and the supporting scriptures and things like that I want to reference, if I have them on my iPad. So I charge that up on Saturday nights because I'm going to be using that in the morning. And also, I'll point out a couple other things here. Right now, I'm in my home office. I have an office at the church, too. But this is an office that I set up here in my house because it's very convenient to have an office in both places. But one of the things that I like to do when I'm actually prepping a sermon is I'll just search on YouTube for some instrumental music. I actually find that it helps me to write. So this is one of the ones that's kind of like a go-to. It's just instrumental folk music. And so I'll put that on in the background. I actually have my laptop. I have it elevated here on a stand because I want it up higher, and I use a separate wireless keyboard because I like typing on this a lot better than I like typing on my laptop. Something else that I typically do is I'll usually have coffee, and I just like sipping a warm beverage and just drinking coffee while I'm listening to instrumental music and then kind of typing out my thoughts. I try and operate in a spot here that's silent where I'm not going to have a lot of distractions. But another thing that is kind of, I think it's entertaining, on my desk, well, there's a couple things you'll notice. On my desk, first, I have a back scratcher. This is really immensely helpful. It provides a lot of, or adds to the quality of my life. So there's that. I use it quite regularly. But I also find that when I'm trying to think creatively, I like having something to fidget with. And so I have just one of these balls that I could just kind of squish when I'm trying to think through an idea. I'll find myself just like pressing this thing and squishing it. Or I actually picked up a fidget spinner a couple years ago, but before fidget spinners, there was always the pen. And I always end up breaking this part off of some of my favorite pens, because while I'm writing and while I'm thinking and while I'm preparing, I don't chew on it, but I find myself like just putting my finger underneath it and sometimes snapping that off. And then let me just kind of point out a couple other things. I guess you could see my computer screen. So let me pull up a message. So here's the message that I'm going to be sharing tomorrow. And you'll notice I don't preach a manuscript, but actually when I'm preparing my sermons, I prepare an entire manuscript because I use this for multiple purposes even afterward. But I like having an entire manuscript of what I plan on speaking about. And so it's kind of like the equivalent of, if this was double spaced, it'd be like a 9 or a 10-page term paper, with the amount of content that I end up having in it. But that's tomorrow's message. And so on Saturday nights, I like to review that. What else? What else? I like to use these for blog content, and sometimes I'll use my sermon content for book chapters and things like that. And here's another thing I get a big kick out of. Let me minimize this here, and I'm going to minimize this here, and I'll show you something that's kind of entertaining. And I get a big kick out of this. So this file here on my screen, you probably only see it a little bit. That file has, so you see each of those folders, each of these folders has 1 year of sermons, and each one of those folders represents a year of preaching at our church. And sometimes I look at this and I'm like, I started at our church in 2008. And so 2008, 2009, 10, 11, 12, all the way up to present day. I have, this is this year's messages so far. I have that in a separate folder, and then I'll put it in the big folder. But sometimes I look at that and I think, I can't believe how many sermons I've preached over that time. You figure it's like 45 to 50 sermons per year, and we've been here for 13 years now. So that's a lot. And so I save everything that I prepare, and I've got it all there in a file. But those are just a few odds and ends of how I go about doing some of my sermon prep. If you're watching this and you regularly prepare messages, I guess there's a whole bunch more I could have even shared here in regard to some of the things that are going on behind the scenes when I'm preparing my sermons. But if you're watching this and you regularly prepare sermons, I'd be curious to know a little bit about your pattern and a little bit about just kind of the approach that you take. So, drop a comment there in the comment section. I'd love to read it, love to hear about it. And I'm trying to take more questions on this channel. And so if you have a question, don't hesitate to leave it in the comment section as well. And maybe your question will be something that I address in an upcoming video. So, all right, I hope you guys have a wonderful remainder to your Saturday if you're watching this today as I'm recording it. And if not, I hope you have a wonderful Sunday tomorrow, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks.